Okay, and we're here with the Focal Point podcast, and we're sitting with Sir Shaun Michael Samaroo. And I don't know what to call you. I mean, you're a futurist, you're a tech visionary, you're coming out with 10 books this year, is that correct? And
Yes.
you're very pro social community reform for the betterment of humanity and for the betterment of consciousness and whatever else comes after consciousness, right? So if we could start this, if you can explain to people out there your title.
So I actually am coming from a journalism background. So I've
Okay.
spent a lot of my years as a journalist, which was my career, but investigative journalism. So I worked in the newspaper industry for quite a while. I've
Okay.
done some television as well. Uh, so I came from a big background in journalism and investigative journalism, which is an interesting industry. It gives you an insight into human nature
Yeah.
and an interest in human nature, in people's character and stuff, but also in how society functions.
Yeah.
And for me, it was not only on a national scale, it became, my interest started widening as I grew older into geopolitics. So, my interest now is not about one society, it's about the world and where power is going and how the world functions and how we live as human beings.
Yeah.
And then from journalism, of course, as a writer, that's why I got into journalism at a young age. But eventually, the journalism morphed or evolved into writing books. So I became a novelist and a writer, and I've got 4 books published, right?
Very good.
But for me, being a writer, uh, I take it very seriously in terms of literature. So I delve into very, very, what you might call deep reading, deep literature. So James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, and Ulysses, and all those deep books. I Those are my reading, like Marcel Proust, In Search of Lost Time, which is a nine volume novel.
Yeah.
So I think it's the longest novel ever written. It's one of my favorite. Finnegan's Wake is, unless you're deep into literature, nobody would even venture to even try Finnegan's Wake as a novel. So, Shakespeare, of course, my favorite Shakespeare is Coriolanus, which is his political play, and gave me a big insight into politics and how politicians. And funny enough, Shakespeare wrote Coriolanus, what, 500-600 years ago?
Yeah.
But a lot of the insights that he had into human nature, actually into the nature of a politician, we see them in operation today in politicians. And so, having studied Shakespeare's play, I apply some of those insights that Shakespeare had into the character of politicians to today's politicians. And it's interesting to look at those things and see how they still operate. So, gradually, my interest zeroed in to human nature. Who are we as human beings? What is possible with us as human beings, as supposedly the highest form, apart from spiritual angels and stuff, the highest form of life. What is possible with us? How far could we push our potential? And so this question is what I pursue even in my life on a daily basis, the vision that I'm living out. It's answering the question, what is possible, especially in this knowledge age, what is possible in being a human being?
Yeah.
And that question drives me every single day.
Okay. So you mentioned you started with journalism, so that's the grassroots of being in media, right? And then you got into fiction. So what about the writing style, going from journalism to fiction? Was that easy, or because those are basically two extremes, maybe, right? Because you're writing for different purposes.
They are very different styles. One of the things that I gravitated to was being original. So there's a literary critic, Harold Bloom, who just passed away a month ago or something. He was the world's greatest reader, and there is such a thing. This guy was the best reader in the world for decades.
So best reader means for number of books or different types of books or
Literature.
literature. Okay.
He read deep literature.
Okay.
So
Okay.
every literature book, classic,
Yeah.
that you can name, he's read
Okay.
in a career that spanned 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
And he taught at Stanford, I think is where he was teaching. But he would read books. That's all he did. He read books. And he became a professor in university teaching what he would gain from these books,
Yeah.
these literature books. And he started writing books of his own. And one of the books that he wrote is called Genius. Actually, it's called Genius. But what the book is about, it's about, he took 100 great writers, like James Joyce and Tolstoy and Shakespeare and all those people. So 100 of the greatest writers in history, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, all those guys. And he analyzed their writing. And he came up with, why are certain people, very, very few human beings, original in the world? When, for example, today's world, we have like 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
But most people are living life conforming to what society wants us, how society wants us to live. And we live following family traditions and culture and all these things. So very few human beings are like Freud or Einstein or these great guys. And the reason they're great, quote unquote great, is because they're original. They came up with original ideas, original insights into the human condition.
Which we all have the potential to do.
Precisely. So each one of us has the potential to be original. So what Harold Bloom did in his book is wrote about 100 writers who came up with original ideas. People like Marx and who came up with the original idea about a communist society, right? For example, or Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations back in 1776 and kickstarted the Industrial Revolution, which we know as the world we live in today. So what happened to me is, as a journalist and interviewing people, statesmen, business people, all kinds of people in society, ordinary people in villages, I really took an interest in human beings and their stories and how people were living. And in reading all these books, including Harold Bloom's, which was a defining book for me, what I started seeing is that the style of writing in journalism and the style of writing, because I wrote my first novel, Nightmares of Knowledge, in 2001, and it was published in 2002. And the styles were very, very different.
Yeah.
Journalism is a very different kind of style from fiction.
Correct.
However, after encountering Harold Bloom's book and thinking about, putting a lot of thinking and self-analysis and stuff into this whole idea of writing and literature and journalism, and it all covers one thing, which is your story.
Yeah.
It covers the stories of human being, and we're all stories. We're walking, dynamic, energized stories, each human being. And so here's what happened, Croydon. I eventually invented my own genre, which is a merger or a mixture of fiction, so the short story type of fiction, merged with what is called literary journalism. So literary journalism was very famous back in the 70s and 80s, especially with New York Times and those big newspapers. And they were famous journalists who wrote literary journalism, which is like fiction, but real, right?
Okay.
And fascinating stories. So I took the short story format, literary journalism, and the personal essay. So 3 different genres, and I collapsed them together.
Oh.
And came up with my own genre, which is how I write. So in other words, I fused literary journalism, short story fiction, and the personal essay. So you bring the author into the mix, your own story. As a writer, if I write your story or anybody's story, I include my own reaction to that, my own subjective reaction to you, to what you're telling me, what we're experiencing as I research your story and interview you. So I put my own, before, writers would stay outside and be objective, especially as journalists, right? And you tell the story. For me, that has changed. Maybe the internet has a lot to do with it because people are more personal. But when I write a story now, I would use my imagination and add some color and flair and style to it, even some character stuff and setting and all those things, which is all come from the short story. And then literary journalism would be all the facts, but in a very creative style. And then I add my own, how should I say it, like the cook and the ingredients.
The voice. You're adding your own
That's
voice.
a good way to, yes, exactly, the voice. That's a good way to say it, yes. I add my own voice to this imaginative thing plus the factual thing. And so I came up with a whole genre.
Have you given it a name?
The name is funny. I keep tagging it online, but nobody's taking it on. It's Spelj. So Spelj is what I call it. So it's very original. I coined the word.
Okay.
And, it over time, I guess, it would be branded. But for now, it's just...
Does it mean anything? Is it an acronym for anything?
It's an acronym for short story, personal essay, and literary journalism.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it catches on, then you should patent the style.
Well, I mean, when we invent things like that, you make it, it's like
Open source,
open
yeah.
source, right?
Yeah.
You make it available to everybody. I would love for people to start using it and experimenting with the style, which I'm doing myself. I'm experimenting with the style and see how far we could push it. Because it's an interesting thing. I have 3 books at home I'm reading. I've been browsing and reading over the past few weeks. And one is an entire book of stories, short stories from Canadian writers like Margaret Atwood and this lady, Alice Munro, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And then I have a book also of classic literary journalism pieces that were published in the New York Times. And then I have a book of personal essays, thick book on, personal essays going back to Socrates' time through the ages to now. So this editor just selected personal essays from throughout history, packed them in a book, and published it. So these 3 books I'm reading and studying and trying to merge how they come together. But that's how I am. Even with publishing books, right? After my journalism career, my choice was to focus completely on writing and publishing, which is not a bad thing to do. It's a nice way to live.
Yeah.
But then something was bothering me because people hardly read printed books today in the format that it is in. And what technology did, so this is my interest now in innovation and technology, what technology did was innovated on music. Music was transformed by technology. And movies became transformed by technology as well. So now movies and music are, in huge demand worldwide. But not books. So the highest form of human knowledge, this literature that I enjoy, and so many people enjoy, is not mass-based. It's not a big consumer item. In fact, in Canada, we had Chapters bookstores, and they basically all closed, but we have Indigo, which is, they have more stuff that they sell than even books, although it's still technically a bookstore. They have so many other things, including blankets and cups and everything they're selling. So the book business is not that great. And one of my challenges was, if I publish my books in the traditional format, which is print, and then ebooks, what traction would I get? You could have the greatest ideas, the greatest insights, you could research, you could read, you could study human nature, you could do everything and put everything nicely together, but it's boring text in a one-dimensional format. You won't reach your audience. And what's the point? We don't write for ourselves, we write for, because we want to impact society, right? Especially coming from a journalism background, which is what we did with newspapers. You want to impact society. And I wanted to do the same thing with books. So again, this innovative thing in me kicked up, this originality. How do you be original? And what I realized is, based on research, the ebook was actually invented before technology impacted music and movies and everything else. Ebooks were invented by Michael Hart in 1971. So nearly 50 years ago, and before the internet took off. An ebook, nothing has been done with books since 1971.
What was the original medium it was on?
Only print.
No, the ebook.
The original thing was film, this microfilm.
Microfilm, okay.
Yeah. But eventually it came online. And even, actually the original, it was microfilm, but Michael Hart's vision was for it to be on IBM's computer.
Yeah.
That's where he was envisioning it to be. And he had a goal, which he called the Gutenberg Project, for 50,000 ebooks to be on the Microsoft. This was this massive, big, huge computer in a big room that IBM had back then, in 1971. And Michael Hart was thinking, if we could get 50,000 of the world's best books on this computer, how great would that be?
Sure, yeah.
And he created this project called the Gutenberg Project, after Gutenberg, who invented the printing press in 1550 or whatever, whenever he invented it. And last year, in 2018, is when that goal was achieved, that 50,000 free ebooks were on the Gutenberg project, which Google eventually bought and then sold. Now it's a project by itself. It stands on its own. But still, books. So Michael Hart invented ebooks way back before the internet, and it stayed the same way for nearly 50 years.
Sure.
No change. So when I came along and I'm thinking, how do I get my ideas and my books that people are excited about it as they are about movies and music, right? And initially it was about my work. But then I started researching, looked into the startup scene and how things work and stuff, and eventually came up with Sims Book.
Okay.
And Sims Book is an innovation on ebooks. So we took ebooks out of the flat, gray, one-dimensional PDF thing and EPUB and moved it into a new realm where anybody can take their story or their talent or their message and brand it across some multimedia street.
Okay, so explain Sims now. This is a new realm where you take the existing information and then you add your touch to it, so it's sort of like open source.
It's totally open. I hope it catches on. Yeah, it's open source. I'm not branding it I'm not trademarking it or anything. I'm branding it, yes, but not trademarking. I want it to be as open as ebooks. But we need to see my goal, Croydon, my goal for the rest of my life. This is why I live. I want to see as much that I could do as possible and even pass on to the next generation. But I want to see every single human being who appears on the face of this earth live that before they pass away, once they live, to ripe old age, I guess, or even, I'm not talking about children, but adults, that everybody produces a book, that everybody writes and publishes their own book. That's my goal.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a whole conversation around reading and writing and how beneficial it is to the human being. And so I'm setting up a platform. My brand, Qualped, it's a visionary brand. I don't even like to think of it as a business because I don't run it as a business. I run it as a movement, as a vision.
Yeah.
So Qualped is the platform, and we're putting Sims Book on that. It's going to be like a Netflix subscription model, and we're developing Sims books. And what Sims means, simple multimedia smart book. So books are supposed to be smart, yet simple. And that's the idea, that it's simple, it's smart, and it's multimedia.
Smart in terms of?
Smart in terms of interaction.
Interaction, okay.
Yeah, like you're reading a book on our platform, you must be able to interact with it, just like you're reading a book in paper. People mark their books. They fold the page. They're reading a printed book, which is nothing like reading an ebook. Reading a printed book, you mark the page and you make, I have books at home on my bookshelf from 1960s and 1970s that I bought in used bookstores where people in the 60s and 70s would make notes and sign their name on it and put their date and they would be reading and they got an insight and they make a little jotting. So there was great interaction with a book when one was reading it. And ebooks kind of limited on that. Some places you could write on the screen and you could make notes and you could pop up sticky note kind of thing and make notes on it and save it and all those things. But with Sims books, we want to make it smart in the sense of it's interesting. That when you encounter this book online, it's a smart device. A book is a device really, right? But it's smart. It's interesting. It's not a dull, gray, flat thing. It's alive. It's dynamic, and then it's also simple. So it's basically text. You can consume it in text, but you can also consume it in. So it's smart in the sense you can consume it in audio if you want to, by just one click. Right? One touch. Or you could do a video of the book if you want to, or video related to the material in the book. So it might not be, for example, the video might not be the text itself on video, but it could be the author talking about the process of putting the book together on a YouTube channel. But you're reading the book and you could click on a button and you could go over to the video. Or you could, the author could do, so we have 26 different products, if I may use the word products, that are attached to the book. So you publish a book, You would have your audio, your video, merchandise, ebook, audiobook, print book, hardcover, softcover. A range of stuff automatically comes out of this thing. So it's
Oh,
like a
amazing.
tree. It's like a tree. A book becomes like a tree. So think of every human being, and we have on our website, qualped.com, there's the writing room. So people could click on the writing room and log in, create an account, and daily you could go in and write. You could copy and paste, or you could write 100 words a day. And in 6 months you have a full length book, right? And they could take that and convert it into our technology. So basically what you're doing is writing text, but what you're giving to the world is text plus a whole bunch of other stuff. And it becomes revenue generating, it becomes your branding, and it becomes your way of communicating you, your heart, your soul to a world that is waiting to hear your story.
Yeah. I like what you've done. I mean, you've really pushed the innovation threshold. You've developed a unique voice, and then not only that, but you've also fused three genres of writing together. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you've gotten into the technological side and sort of rebranded that, but also evolved it into this. If you're saying 26 product features, that's a 26 multi-dimensional experience
That's
for the
right.
user, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it's also 26 possible revenue streams.
Yeah.
So we live in the world, and this is the what I'm doing is so multidimensional. Like the essence of what I'm doing is this: we're living in a new age, and this message I will really want to get out to people. The industrial age is over. The industrial age started in 1776 when Adam Smith published his book. And the whole of human civilization is about somebody publishing an idea in a book. So Adam Smith did his in 1776. We saw it with Darwin, we saw it with Marx and the Communist Manifesto, we saw it in the Bible, books everywhere, the Quran, everything. A book is always defining human identity and human progress and how we live and how we dwell on the earth. But anyway, Adam Smith published his book Wealth of Nations in 1776, and it talked about specialization, and it talked about like economic specialization. It talked about factories. It talked about progress. How do we create wealth? It talked about how to satisfy 6 basic needs, how to satisfy our wants.
It's the Bible for economic students,
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. And so over the past 200 years, but especially from the early 1900s, when Ford invented the motor car, we've seen an explosion of progress all around the world. Even poverty has been reduced, healthcare has increased everywhere. There's tremendous progress happening in the world. We live in a world where you see a lot of negative news, but there's a lot of good news.
Yeah.
Child mortality has decreased tremendously. Gross poverty is gone. A lot of good things are happening because of the industrial age. So we built a world. Of course, there are negative effects like the environmental catastrophe and all those things, but with roads and cars and housing and all these things and factories and we fueled a society that we could develop robots now, and we could go to the moon, and we could do all these things. But the industrial age, which is now coming to an end, it is coming to an end because it has reached its limit. It can't go further. And we see with the soul of capitalism, which took over the industrial age. Communism was defeated and capitalism became the number one thing. But capitalism became greedy and selfish, and capitalism started, it got to a point where it became monstrous. So we see, for example, CEOs paying themselves $80 million, but a worker getting $12 an hour. And so it fueled, tremendous injustices economically, not socially.
And just to define capitalism, I mean, capitalism is the privatization of business, but because it gets privatized, there is the capacity for greed. So it can happen, and it does happen. We see that. But it doesn't mean that to be a capitalist, you have to be greedy, right?
Okay, to me, this is...
I mean, if we're going with the definition that capitalism is just the privatization of business, right?
So capitalism to me is based on acquiring capital, right? So in acquiring capital, there is Eric Fromm wrote a book called Having and Being, And in Having a Being, he dealt with the subject tremendously, in a really in-depth way. And what he talks about is capitalism as a, once you are after capital, any kind of capital, ownership of capital, you're thinking about living a life of having stuff. And in that psyche of having, I gotta have more, I gotta have more, I gotta have more. Greed shows up as a necessary evil. It has to be there. If I don't have some amount of, and the Bible mentions it as, what's the word I'm looking for? As when you consume stuff
Like
constantly, it's a vice. It's an evil. It's there's a word in the Bible.
It's one of the 7 deadly sins.
Yes. When you want to consume and have stuff constantly, right?
Like a insatiable
it builds all of those things, right? You have an appetite that you can't satisfy. You want to buy more. You go to the store today and satisfy your desire for a computer. Next 2 months, you want a computer that is, even with children, we see that. You want a computer or a phone that is bigger, right? And even in factories like iPhone, they made it a most amazing phone. But in 2 years, it's gone, and they need to update the OS, and they need to update the hardware, and you got to buy a new phone for $1,000, And so capitalism keeps fueling this. I want more. I want more.
And I guess a small amount of greed is okay as long as people on the other side aren't getting hurt because of that, right?
Yeah.
There's a balance with that.
Right.
When it gets to the point where people are
when
getting
it fuels
hurt,
injustice.
Yeah. Then that's not good.
Yeah, because for me to get, here's how capitalism works. For me to get what I want, I have to take it from somebody.
Yeah.
You see, wealth, and Adam Smith said this, wealth is not created, never created. Wealth is transferred. Wealth is always, if I want to make $1 million, I have to get either 1 million people or 10,000 people or work on the math to transfer money to my bank account. That's how I became a millionaire, right, or a billionaire or whatever. I can't go create the money. Now the government can can print money, but we can't, right? So wealth in society in a capitalist system is transferred.
Yeah.
And so I have to either in marketing, by deception, by all those things. But I don't want to get too extreme with this thing. My point is that the industrial age came to a place where it became monstrous. It outgrew its usefulness, so to speak. It doesn't work anymore. And so the same thing happened before capitalism. We had the age of feudalism, when you had these huge landlords would own massive lands and rent pieces of the land to peasants. And the peasants would farm the land and go to the market and sell their produce. And so agricultural society, but feudal in nature, with a monarchy and landlords. And that didn't work. It worked for hundreds of years, maybe a couple thousand years, since the Greek and Persian empires through to the Roman Empire. It was all there. But then it didn't work. And then Adam Smith came and said, okay, let's do the industrial age, industrial society. And Ford came along and all those guys and built the whole thing, steel and concrete culture, factory culture. But today we see that doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So human beings being who we are, we keep evolving and reinventing and redeveloping ourselves. We now are on the cusp of developing a new age, which is the knowledge age. So what I'm doing with Qualped, which is my brand, and Sim's book, and this new genre of writing and all those things, is trying to give what I think I'm able to give to the world, to leave it there. Whoever wants it, they can take it. It's on the table, right? I'm not forcing it on the world and say, hey, this, I'm just leaving it there. My own thinking, my own thoughts based on my reading, my own inventions. This is what I think is necessary for the knowledge age. Correct. This is the way books should be done. Every human being has knowledge, has story. But the farmer, the factory worker, even the specialist who is a professional, even the doctor, their story doesn't play any role in them functioning in society. Their story is a private thing. I want to take it out of that. It should be, your story should be the only thing you're living for. Instead, in the industrial age, people lived to own a house, to own a car, to own something, to own a piece of land, right? the knowledge age would be different. And it's now starting, we're on the cusp of the dawn of it now starting. Where what is important is your knowledge, is your expertise, is your talent, it's your essential life skills. Your total package as a unique, original human being. There is no other Shaun or Croydon on the face of the earth. There never was in history. There never will be in future. But we are here now. Yeah. What mark can we make? What contribution can we make to the human family as we pass through this time and one day become too old and can't do it? But when we're able, what are we contributing to humanity instead of living this in an industrial society of consuming stuff? What are we giving back? What are we leaving? What are we creating? What are we generating? And this is what the knowledge age is all about. And the knowledge age has one guy who is building the blueprint for it. And his name is Ray Kurzweil. So Ray Kurzweil actually developed the whole blueprint for the knowledge age. And it's futuristic. It's fantastic. It's amazing. I'm kind of pessimistic about it as a novelist because I'm writing about it as well. I'm doing novels on it. But the knowledge age is like the best age man has ever known, and it's very futuristic. It's like Elon Musk and those guys, Brennan Page at Google, Zuckerberg at Facebook, all these guys who are doing Silicon Valley and high tech, even Alibaba with Jack Ma, all these guys are building the knowledge age. So they're putting the groundwork in for the knowledge age the same way Henry Ford did, and even Darwin did back in the early 1900s.
Any idea what comes after the information/knowledge age?
Okay, so I think we've gone through the information age. Yeah. No longer is information, data is a commodity, is the biggest commodity. But information is too confusing. So what the experts or the designers of society are doing is kind of saying, we don't want information, we want useful information, which is knowledge. Yeah. So knowledge is the thing. After the knowledge age, if you're asking me my personal opinion, and futurism is one of the things I take a passion in.
Which is why I asked.
I'm not pessimistic about after. And here's the reason why. Which Kurzweil, who runs an organization called Singularity, so Singularity University, he set up that organization. And it's funded by the US government and Google and Facebook and Amazon, all these big companies.
Is that affiliated with Peter Diamandis?
Yes, he's part of it. Yeah. He's part of it. So he's one of the futurists as well, but Ray Kurzweil is his boss. Yeah. So they are building the knowledge age, and they have one goal in mind, which is it sounds amazing, it sounds unreal, but it's very, very real. Their goal is to, okay, let me back up a little bit here. There is, in 1945, there was a guy called Vannevar Bush who wrote a paper called As We May Think. That's the name of the paper, As We May Think. That paper, Bill Gates found that paper when he was in university, and he studied that paper. He quit university and developed the personal computer and Windows.
He was inspired by that paper?
The paper basically had a blueprint for it. This guy, Vannevar Bush, wrote in this paper called As We May Think, he wrote about a machine called a meme. He called it a meme. And that is the PC that we see today, with a mouse and a keyboard and a screen. Bill Gates took that paper and that imagination that this guy... So Vannevar Bush is the one who was leading the team that built the nuclear bomb. So he was in charge of the... He worked with the team, but one of the senior guys, scientists, who worked with Oppenheimer team that built the nuclear bomb in World War II that blew up Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan. So after the war, he thought, let's do something good for humanity. I've seen destruction, right? I've been a part of that destruction, and it horrified him. And so he wrote this paper and said, let's do something good. Now, in the 80s, Bill Gates found the paper, built the personal computer. But after Vannevar Bush, in 1945, wrote that paper, in 1962, there was a different guy, Doug Engelbart, who wrote a second paper. And he titled that paper, Augmenting Human Intelligence. How do we augment human intelligence? In other words, the human being is supposed to be such a which is my big question. What is possible in being a human being, right? We're supposed to be intelligent. We're supposed to be super intelligent beings on the face of the earth. But you look at society, and humans are pretty much very stupid, right? We live lives that are, you know, we conform to everything. And so Doug Engelbart looked at Vannevar Bush's paper and say, as we may think, let's augment human intelligence. And that paper is what Silicon Valley, people like Zuckerberg and Brennan Page, especially Brennan Page from Google, they encountered that paper in university. And they also quit university, just like Bill Gates.
Cycle all over again.
Yes, and they built Google, and they built Facebook, and they built all these big Twitter and Amazon and LinkedIn and all these places from this little paper. I can send it to you. It's called Augmenting Human Intelligence. And why am I saying all that? Because the end of the knowledge age, what Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis and all of these guys want, what they want the knowledge age to deliver is a fusion of the human biology with the power of quantum computers. Not even computers as we know them today, but quantum computers.
This is what Elon Musk is doing also, right?
They're all working on it, yes. Yeah. So they're all working on the same project.
With Neuralink.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So the end of the knowledge age is supposed to be augmented human beings.
I think that'll be great because as an avid book reader such as yourself, one of the love-hate relationships with books is the love part is the glean of information you get, but the hate part is the 3 weeks it might take you to finish a book. And I've always said that if you could just look at the title of a book and in 30 seconds absorb it, that'd be great because then you'd get through so many books much faster, right?
Yeah.
But then the loss of that is also, the nice thing about taking time with the book is you get to dance with the story and, you get to ask questions and you go along, right? Mm-hmm. But then with this fusion of human biology and quantum computing, would we be able to read books faster and absorb the information faster as well?
The goal of people like Ray Kurzweil is that we would not have to go on a computer and log in and find Google search and type in something. We could imagine it and we see it in our head.
Amazing.
All the information. So here is where, and I'm writing a novel on this. In fact, my first novel is the first of a 10-volume novel I'm doing on exactly this what we're talking about. So what they're planning to do is have a mainframe computer that is a global database of every human being on the planet. So you're born, you're registered, boom, you're uploaded to the database. And this database connects wirelessly, mostly by solar power, to a chip in your hand or your forehead.
Wow.
So you could imagine something, and this is very futuristic, but it's not that futuristic because Kurzweil is projecting that this would be actual reality for every human being by 2040. So we're looking at 20 years away.
It's not that far away.
That's right. They were originally projecting 2020, next year. But there's a lot of rejection of the idea. There's a lot of pushback from society, from privacy advocates and even moral people. They push back and say, no, you can't mess with a human being. Don't mess with the biology of the human being, right? So they had to kind of slow down the process. So they gradually are merging it into human consciousness. So that one day, like, not this millennial generation, maybe their kids, the idea would be so natural to the human being, to the young human being, that they would say, yeah, let's merge with this virtual world and no problem.
And do you foresee a point after that the machine maybe overtakes the human?
Yes, it's already happening. So the reason I'm pessimistic about the end of the knowledge age is that, which is way out, right? Maybe 100 years from now. But the end of the knowledge age, the reason I'm pessimistic is that here you have a mainframe computer sitting somewhere in the world. And let's say 10 billion people on the planet. All 10 billion human database is networked into this computer. And that computer has one programmer who takes charge of it. And that guy could be a Hitler.
Yeah.
Could be a crazy guy. Now, if it's a good person, we're okay. But if it's a crazy guy who could mess with that database or mess with the programming of that computer, he could mess up every human being. And I think that will eventually happen because it's the story of history.
Someone could send the virus to the computer, you never know.
Yeah, yeah. So once you network every human being in a central database, you're looking at trouble.
Yeah.
Right? No matter how superior we might be, how intelligent we might be, how enhanced we might be, there is a program that controls us.
Yeah.
That could mess with with our hormones, even with our thought process, with our there's a movie, The Truman Show, with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at something like that as the end of the knowledge age.
So we have to be careful playing with fire.
And we have never been. We always play with fire. We love it.
And you can't really stop it, right? If it's
You
headed
can't
in
stop
that
it, no,
direction,
no.
it's where it's
This
going.
is why you would see on Facebook many times, well, quite a few times on Facebook, I would put a comment saying that the current human DNA, the genetic makeup of human beings currently, is coming to an end. We will see an end to the current DNA of human beings, and we would see a new species after that.
The humans could be extinct.
Current DNA of humans will be extinct.
Yeah.
Human beings themselves would not be extinct.
The DNA will.
The DNA
They
will.
would have evolved into a different type of species.
Yes, 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 yes.
But then if the species is for the better of moving forward,
It would be.
evolution and progress, then why
Yeah.
not, right?
It would be. It would be.
As long as we mind our manners along the way.
Yeah, yeah. And that futuristic world where we're of a new species, a new DNA structure, a new, even a new mortality. I don't think that system we would see anything like the world we see today.
Yeah.
For example, private ownership. There would be no private ownership. There would be no, I own this and you own that. We would share, we would, kindness, gentleness, the good things of life. Love, for example, would be the foundation of everything. And I think humans have always imagined such a life. For us, the perfect heaven is a place of love and kindness and goodness. And I think because it's embedded in our consciousness, it's embedded in our imagination, that's where we will end up. But before we end up there, we're going to go through this period of absolute self-destruction.
Wow. And on that note, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Before I go, just really quick, any idea after the humans and the machines fuse, what happens after that?
Well, there would be a time of first getting used to the whole idea, the whole new structure, and then there would be a time of totally peace, and the world would operate like heaven, like a miracle, like everything would be so amazing.
I guess we just have to be there to see what comes next, right?
Yeah,
You can only go, I guess, so far into the horizon, and until you reach that point, you'll be able to see further ahead.
Yeah. What I envision would happen eventually is absolute boredom.
So all of this was just to go back to square one?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Sitting in the cave with the fire, looking at the stars.
Look at it now. We see from rich countries, Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries, even Canada, America and stuff. What people enjoy doing is going back to nature, going hiking through the trails or going through Africa, on a vacation backpacking, going to the Caribbean, through South America. That's what people enjoy. So we especially as immigrants, we came here to this country, but even Canadians and Americans and Europeans and from rich countries, we want success and progress and all these things. But once we achieve those things, we go back to camping.
Yeah.
We go back to pitching a tent under a tree and the stars and being there, right?
Just staring into space.
Yeah. We go to the ocean and just look at the water.
Well, I've been known to say boredom sometimes can be quite exciting.
Oh, really?
Gets you back to ground one.
At the end of the day, it comes back for me to the question, what is possible in being a human being? And that question is, I'm going to do a YouTube channel and podcast series and books, and I really want to talk to the human family about what is possible in being a human being. And Ray Kurzweil is answering that with his singularity system, which is now the blueprint for the future. I want to answer it in a different way.
Yeah.
Not to compete with him, I can't. He's way too powerful. I'm not.
But again, to extend the possibilities, right?
Yeah. What is possible in being a human being in the knowledge age?
Yeah.
Without having to fuse yourself to the virtual world.
That's great. I'm glad there's people like you out there pushing the envelope on possibilities, on innovation. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
I'm excited to be following you on social media. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, my website is Qualped, Qualped.com.
Okay.
You could email me off of there, or qualped@gmail.com. It's my email.
Amazing. And I'll put these in the show notes as well.
Okay.
Thanks again, Shaun. It was amazing speaking with you. All the best.
Thanks, Croydon. Appreciate this. This is a great honor. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks.